The gym sat on the corner of Linwood and 12th, a squat brick building with faded red paint and windows fogged from years of sweat and winters. Inside, the air buzzed with conversation and the smell of old canvas, like a place that had seen its share of victories and regrets. The ring at the center looked tired, but proud, its ropes frayed at the corners held together more by memory than material. Families filled the bleachers, parents with thermoses, kids holding homemade signs, and old-timers in faded tracksuits nodding to each other with quiet recognition. It wasn't flashy, but it felt alive. This was more than a gym tonight. It was a reunion of values of rhythm of roots that ran deeper than the concrete beneath their feet. Tyson McNeil, known online as Flash, arrived late on purpose. A gleaming white Escalade rolled up to the curb, and the crowd outside parted, as if a movie star had stepped out. Cameras flashed. Phones rose instantly. He wore gold-tinted sunglasses. Despite the dim light, a sleeveless hoodie hanging loose over his sculpted arms. Every step he took had a beat, like he was walking in tune with the track that played in his earbuds. Inside, he barely looked around. He nodded to no one. His crew trailed behind him, all wearing matching gear that bore his face stylized in comic book flair. They laughed loudly and slapped each other's backs as if they owned the place. And, in a way, Flash acted like he did. He passed by a small table near the ring where a man in his 60s stood organizing raffle tickets. Coach Derek Hayes glanced up, eyes narrowing behind thick frames. His sweatshirt bore the name of the gym, cracked and faded, but still clear. He watched Flash walk past without acknowledgement and then looked down again, shaking his head. Not angry, just tired. Maya stood beside him, eyes wide, clinging to a notepad. 14, all limbs and curiosity, she was the youngest volunteer that night. She whispered to the coach, asking if that really was Flash McNeil. Coach didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her notebook and asked why she wasn't sketching the ring. She said she wanted to remember the way Flash walked. He told her that was fine, but one day she'd want to remember the way someone stands. The sound system crackled to life, and the MC welcomed everyone to the annual Woodward Legacy event, a night of friendly matches and fundraiser bouts. Cheers echoed off the walls, but they were warm, not wild. These were folks who cheered because they cared, not because they wanted to post about it. Flash stepped up for his photo op with the event banner. He took off his hoodie, revealing a torso etched like a sculpture. He flexed. His team filmed. Kids gasped. A few of the older men in the corner leaned back and exchanged glances. One of them muttered that a body can win a fight, but it won't keep your soul from getting beaten. In the locker area, Flash stood in front of a mirror and shadow-boxed, his hands moving in sharp bursts of speed. He smiled at his reflection. His coach for the night, a hired name from California, sat texting on a bench. Flash didn't need instruction. He needed a spotlight, and that spotlight would be his again tonight. Outside the locker room, Coach Hayes walked along the edge of the gym floor, checking the match cards. He paused beside the water station where Maya filled small cups and told her to watch the way people warm up. She asked if Flash was good. Coach said he was fast. Then he added that fast isn't always good. Sometimes fast is just early. The bleachers continued to fill. Kids wore shirts with Flash's logo. An old man in a wheelchair wheeled himself into the front row and nodded at Coach Hayes as he passed. They used to spar together in the 70s. Neither moved fast now, but both moved with care. A pair of local fighters finished their undercard bout. The crowd clapped warmly, rising for both of them, win or lose. They shook hands, smiled, and bowed. Maya asked if Flash would do that. Coach didn't reply. He just motioned for her to hand out water cups to the next group coming off the mat. Then came the introduction of the main attraction. The house lights dimmed. Music blasted. Flash's walkout song roared through the speakers, something bass-heavy and full of brags. He strutted out, flexing, filming himself. Fans screamed. Phones waved like lighters. Coach Hayes folded his arms and leaned against the corner post. His expression didn't change. He had seen better fighters. He had seen worse men. But something about this moment made him wonder what this night was really going to become. Maya stood, frozen eyes flicking between Flash and the crowd, unsure if she was impressed or just overwhelmed. She asked if Coach ever walked out to music like that. He said no. Back in his day, all you heard was the bell. Flash entered the ring, hopped on the ropes, and raised his arms. The spotlight hit his chest just right, and he gleamed. Every movement was measured for impact, for clicks, for applause. The crowd ate up most of them at least. But in the far corner of the gym, an old man sat in the shadows. No one had noticed him arrive. He wore a simple black jacket, arms crossed, eyes steady. He watched Flash perform and blinked once, slow and unimpressed. Then he looked down at his watch and waited. The gym may have belonged to the New Age tonight, but it still breathed from older lungs. It remembered men who moved with meaning, not for the camera, but for what was left after the lights went out. And somewhere beneath the chants and cheers, that old rhythm was still beating. The night was young. The ring was ready. But not everyone knew what kind of fight they were about to witness. Nobody really noticed the man at first. He came in through the side entrance while most eyes were glued to the ring or the big screen replaying Flash's highlights. He wore a dark windbreaker jeans and old sneakers. Nothing about him shouted celebrity, though his face had once filled movie posters across the country. The few who caught a glimpse blinked, did a double take, then nudged whoever stood nearest, quietly, respectfully. Chuck Norris had arrived. He moved without announcement, offering a quick nod to the organizers who guided him toward the folding chairs near the stage. They knew why he was here. His old friend, Reggie Daniels, the man who once owned this gym, had passed 6 months earlier. Chuck was here to honor him. That was it. A favor to a friend, a gesture of memory. Someone handed him a microphone for a short speech later in the evening. He accepted it with a quiet thank you. Then took a seat and waited. The gym crowd, slowly realizing who was in the building, shifted in energy. The older folks lit up murmuring things like, "He still looks the same," or "I didn't know he knew Reggie." The kids whispered with curiosity, unsure who the old guy was or why their parents suddenly looked so alert. Flash didn't notice Chuck at first. He was in the back, pacing the locker room phone angled up for a live stream. Thousands of followers watched him flex-crack jokes and warm up for the bout like he was walking into Madison Square Garden. His energy was loud, his smile camera-ready. One of his trainers came in and told him someone big was here. Flash raised an eyebrow, then peeked out the curtain. The camera caught his smirk. "Well, look who it is," he said, pointing his phone toward Chuck. The old cowboy showed up to watch me work. The stream went wild. Laughing emojis, comments flying in. Flash leaned in, pulled his sunglasses down just enough to wink at the screen. Told them maybe I'll ask him to bless the ring before I step in. Or maybe I'll show him what speed looks like in 2025. Behind him, a few of his crew chuckled. One of them whispered that maybe Chuck came to learn something. Flash laughed louder than he needed to. The stream kept rolling. Meanwhile, Chuck sat quietly, legs crossed, listening to the announcer call out raffle winners. He clapped for the winners, nodded to the volunteers, and asked one of them if Reggie's widow was around. When she came out from the side hallway, he stood and gave her a gentle hug. They didn't need to speak much. She gripped his arm. That was enough. The next match finished early due to a stoppage. The crowd clapped, but something was off. Whispers spread among the organizers. The announcer stepped away from the mic, and Coach Hayes leaned into the discussion with his arms folded tight. Maya saw it too. She asked if something was wrong. Coach told her to wait. Backstage medics were looking at one of the event fighters. A knee twist in warm-ups. He wouldn't be fighting tonight. He was Flash's opponent, the one the whole night had been built around. Suddenly, the main event had no match, no payoff, no headliner, and people were already expecting fireworks. Panic crept in. One of the coordinators asked if anyone local could fill in, someone younger, maybe one of the amateurs, but none of them wanted it. Not against Flash, not live-streamed to thousands. That was asking for public humiliation. It was Chuck who broke the silence. "I'll do it," he said, like someone offering to refill a drink. Calm, no edge to it, just a quiet solution. Everyone stared at him. One man laughed before catching himself. Chuck looked around and asked what the rules were. 3 rounds, exhibition format. No knockout intent, just a show. That's all he said. Then, I'm in. Reggie would have wanted the show to go on. The team tried to talk him out of it. Not because they doubted his skill, but because of how it would look. He was a legend. Why tarnish it? He just smiled. I'm not here to win, I'm here to help the night finish right. Word spread fast. The crowd heard before the announcer could confirm. People turned to each other, unsure if it was a gag. Maya asked Coach Hayes if it was real. Coach didn't blink. If he said he's doing it, then it's real. Flash, still filming backstage, got the news midstream. He stopped shadowboxing, looked at his team, laughed hard. "Are you serious?" he asked no one in particular. "The old guy." "That's the plan." He turned the phone on himself, eyes wide. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I fight a legend, or at least what used to be one." Comments exploded. Memes started instantly. In the gym, the announcer took the mic. He hesitated, glanced toward Chuck, then cleared his throat. Due to unforeseen changes in the card, tonight's main event will now feature a special guest. One known for decades of martial arts cinema and contributions to the community. He didn't need to finish the name. The room erupted. Some cheered out of excitement. Others laughed out of disbelief. But everyone reacted. Chuck stood and removed his jacket. Beneath it, a simple compression shirt. No logos, no name. Just a quiet man with a strong posture and older bones. He walked toward the ring like someone walking home after church. Flash's music hit again, louder than before. More lights, more fog. He ran out, bouncing, showboating, talking into his phone the whole way. The contrast couldn't have been louder. Chuck entered the ring without music. No waves, no posing, just a nod to the referee. The bell hadn't rung, but the mood had already shifted. Some people still smiled, but the air didn't feel so funny anymore. In the crowd, Coach Hayes leaned over to Maya and said something low. "Watch how he breathes, not how he punches." Maya nodded, eyes fixed on the ring. Flash bounced on his heels, grinned, waved to the camera. He pointed at Chuck and said something the mic didn't catch. Chuck didn't respond. He rolled his shoulders, lifted his hands, and looked straight ahead. No words, no grin. Just readiness. The bell hadn't rung yet, but something had already started, and it wasn't what anyone expected. The noise hadn't died down yet. People were still laughing, still cheering, still unsure whether this was really happening. Some thought it was a bit part of the show, a late-night stunt or viral marketing trick. Others leaned in trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Chuck Norris was climbing through the ropes. He moved without ceremony, brushing one hand across the top rope as he stepped through. No music, no lights, no coach in his corner. Just him dressed in plain black shorts, a worn rash guard, and shoes that had seen more than their share of mats. The referee gave him a look and a brief nod. Chuck nodded back slow and simple. Across the ring, Flash bounced on the balls of his feet, still talking to his phone. The live stream hadn't stopped since the locker room. He pointed at Chuck and smirked. He called out to the crowd, making jokes, mimicking an old man with creaky knees. A few kids laughed. Some adults did too, though quieter now. Their eyes stayed on Chuck. Near the front, Coach Hayes didn't move. His arms were folded across his chest, but his posture had stiffened. He was watching the Chuck closely, like someone studying an incoming storm. Not loud, not fast, but changing the air around it. Maya nudged him and whispered something about Flash being funny. He didn't answer right away. Then he said that sometimes funny is just fear in costume. She turned back to the ring, her smile fading. The announcer's voice sounded thinner than before. He tried to keep the hype going, introduced both fighters with dramatic flair, but the words hung oddly in the air. When he said Chuck's name, the crowd hesitated. Then applause rose. Not explosive, but steady. Older folks stood first. Some put their hands over their hearts, some clapped with the quiet reverence of a church. Flash bowed with a grin, exaggerated and slow. He twirled one arm like a circus act. His phone caught every angle. He looked like he was having the time of his life. Chuck stayed still in his corner hands, resting lightly near his chest, as soft but focused. He didn't blink much. A few younger kids started chanting Flash's name. They bounced on the bleachers, calling out, filming their own videos. Flash egged them on. Shouted back, called the night his. He pointed across the ring again and told them this was going to be history. The best kind. The kind that ends in 10 seconds. Then the bell rang. It wasn't a sharp clang, more like a dry echo off old metal, but it cut through the noise anyway. Just like that, the laughter faded. Not all at once, but like a slow leak. Flash moved toward the center gloves high, still grinning. Chuck stepped forward with no rush. His hands came up not tight, not rigid. Just enough. There was no charge, no opening flurry. Flash feinted a jab, spun halfway, and tried to fake a low kick. Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't even shift his weight. He just watched. Flash threw a real shot next. A quick jab meant to test range. It came close, but not close enough. Chuck didn't block it. He didn't have to. His upper body leaned half an inch back and the glove missed clean. Flash laughed. He turned toward the crowd and held up 2 fingers like a scoreboard. The crowd chuckled, but it was thinner now. Something was starting to settle in, some tension, some quiet. Coach Hayes leaned forward slightly, hands still crossed. He whispered something only Maya heard. She looked at him, confused. He said that wasn't a dodge. That was a measurement. In the ring, Chuck didn't move his feet. He kept the same quiet stance, elbows tucked, breath steady. Flash circled now, less playful, trying to push the pace. He threw 2 more shots, fast and sharp. Chuck slipped one, blocked the other with a simple turn of the wrist. Flash stepped back and smiled, but this one didn't reach his eyes. Chuck didn't smile at all. A minute in, and Flash's face had changed. The grin was still there, but thinner now, forced at the edges. He spoke less on the phone. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore, they were watching. People leaned forward in their seats. They stopped filming. Even the kids with the signs stopped chanting. Something about the way Chuck moved made noise feel disrespectful. Flash lunged again, harder this time. He threw a hook fast and wide. Chuck dipped low, not dramatically, just enough. When he rose, their eyes locked. Just a second. Maybe less. But something passed between them. Flash reset, glanced to his corner, took a breath. Chuck didn't change a thing. Maya whispered that it looked like Flash was chasing something that didn't want to be caught. Coach Hayes nodded once, said Chuck wasn't running. He was showing him how much a space really existed between fast and precise. The bell rang, again ending round 1. No one clapped, no one stood. They were still processing what they saw and what they didn't. Flash walked to his corner slower than before. He didn't say much, just drank water and stared across the ring. His phone was still running, but the comments had slowed. The emojis were fewer. Some people were typing question marks. Chuck sat on his stool, hands folded in his lap. His breathing hadn't changed. He leaned forward, just a little eyes on the canvas like he was remembering something. Or waiting. The crowd had come for a spectacle, for a laugh, a highlight. But something deeper had entered the room. They couldn't name it yet, but it had already begun. Flash came out of his corner with a hop in his step and a smirk stretched wide across his face. He raised his gloves, danced side to side, and winked at someone in the front row. His shoulders rolled loose like he had a song in his head that only he could hear. Chuck stepped forward. Slowly, hands relaxed in front of him. No bounce, no theatrics, just steady movement, like someone who had nothing to prove and all night to do it. The canvas creaked under their feet. Flash threw a jab, fast and flashy. Chuck didn't flinch. He shifted an inch and let it pass clean. Flash followed with a spinning feint, then a backstep into a half-hearted hook. Still nothing. Chuck stayed upright, eyes locked, never chasing. The crowd chuckled. Some clapped. It still felt like a performance to them. Flash gave a little bow and twirled his glove like he was stirring a pot. He called out something, but Chuck didn't respond. He barely blinked. Another jab came, then 2 quick crosses. Chuck moved his shoulders just enough for the gloves to miss. His feet hadn't moved once. Only his torso adjusted. It was like watching someone trace the future in real time. Flash frowned just for a second, then reset and threw another flashy combo. Left, right, low kick. Chuck lifted one knee, checked the kick, and tilted his chin toward the center. It wasn't a taunt, it was an invitation. In the bleachers, the laughter had faded. People weren't sure why. Maybe it was the silence coming from Chuck's corner. Maybe it was the way Flash had stopped smiling when he thought no one was looking. Maybe it was the way Chuck didn't react at all. Coach Hayes leaned toward Maya and whispered that this wasn't defense, it was reading. She looked confused, so he added that Chuck wasn't dodging to avoid. He was mapping behavior, measuring rhythm. Flash lunged in again, this time faster. His jab snapped forward. Chuck shifted and caught it on his forearm. Not hard, just enough to see it. Flash stepped back and smiled, but his lips looked tighter now. His hands twitched between shots. Chuck stayed in place. His back foot turned slightly. His breath never changed. Not once. From the cheap seats, an old man with a cane sat up straighter. He nudged the guy next to him. They didn't speak. They just nodded. That kind of control didn't come from reflexes. It came from memory. Flash circled now, breathing harder. He shouted something toward the crowd. A joke. It landed flat. He stepped in again with another 3-punch combo. Chuck slipped the first, parried the second, and stepped inside the third without throwing a thing. His shoulder touched Flash's chest for a split second, then backed away. Flash stumbled a half-step, surprised. He looked at Chuck like he'd missed a cue, like the rhythm was wrong. He tried to reset it, but something was off with his timing. His hands weren't flowing like before. Chuck's eyes hadn't moved from the center. The crowd grew quieter. A few murmurs rippled through the front rows. Someone said he wasn't supposed to be this calm. Someone else whispered that Flash looked rushed. Up in the stands, a woman who had boxed back in the 80s told her son to stop filming and start watching. Flash came in again, this time with force. A leaping right hook, sharp and angry. Chuck dipped low and stepped to the side, barely missing the shot. He didn't counter. He just stood to Flash's left now. The space had shifted. Flash blinked, unsure how he ended up facing the wrong direction. Chuck didn't capitalize. He let him turn. Flash squared up, jaw tight now. The grin was gone completely. He spat into the corner and wiped sweat from his brow. Coach Hayes sat back and whispered to Maya that this wasn't a fight. Not yet. It was a mirror. Chuck was letting Flash see himself. Maya didn't speak. Her eyes were wide. Flash bounced again, but it wasn't the same rhythm. He was moving too fast. His breath was short. He lunged in with another flurry, and Chuck blocked one, stepped past two, and brushed his hand along Flash's glove as he moved through the final swing like a painter checking for weight. People in the crowd leaned forward. They started watching Chuck's feet, watching his hips, watching how little he moved. Flash shouted again. No jokes this time. Just noise. He came in again. Chuck leaned back, pivoted, and tapped Flash's glove with an open palm. No strike, just contact. Flash swung wide, missed, and caught himself on the ropes. For the first time, he looked tired. The bell rang. Both men stepped back. Chuck breathed through his nose-chest, rising slowly. Flash shook out his arms, scowled, turned to his corner, and snapped at someone. His live-stream phone sat face down on the mat. Forgotten. The crowd sat in silence for a moment. Then soft applause started in one corner. Not for a hit, not for a moment of glory, just for awareness. A few more joined in, not loud, but steady. Chuck sat on his stool. No towel, no water. Just breathe. Flash glared across the ring. He wasn't playing anymore. He didn't understand what was happening. But something had shifted, and deep down he could feel it. Flash paced in his corner, shoulders rising and falling too fast. His coach tried to speak to him, but he waved the words away. His mouth moved like he was chewing frustration. The crowd buzzed softly now, not with excitement, but with confusion they hadn't named yet. Chuck hadn't moved still on his stool, still breathing slowly. His eyes weren't on Flash. They were somewhere past him, like he was watching something deeper than what was in front of him. Flash stepped forward before the bell. Just a few paces, just enough to draw attention. The referee turned, but didn't stop him. Flash pointed across the ring, sweat dripping down his jaw, his voice raised. "Say something, old man. Say it to the crowd. Say it to me." Chuck lifted his gaze. His eyes met Flash's and didn't waver. Then he stood. Not fast, not dramatic. He just rose to his feet as if gravity had finally given permission. He stepped forward. The gym grew quieter. Flash smirked and tilted his head like he'd won something. He held his arms out, waiting for a sound bite, waiting for a line to mock later. Chuck leaned in. Not enough for the mic to catch, just enough for one man to hear. The fight hasn't started yet. Flash froze, his breath caught in his throat. His smirk held for a second too long, then cracked. He blinked, then stepped back. Slowly. Just one step. Chuck didn't follow. He turned and walked calmly back to his stool. Sat down like nothing had changed, but something had. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't laugh. They didn't even speak. It was like a room full of people, all holding the same breath. Maya looked up at Coach Hayes. Her voice was small, unsure. What just happened? Coach didn't turn his head. His eyes stayed fixed on the ring. He said one word. Watch. Maya looked back. Flash stood still, rubbing his glove against the edge of his shorts. The bell hadn't rung for round 2, but his energy was gone. His shoulders no longer bounced. His mouth no longer ran. The moment stretched. A soft hum filled the space, not from noise, but from silence. It was the moment the storm began to turn. Not loud, not violent, but certain. Something had shifted inside the gym. Not in the lights or the sound. In the air, in the pulse under the skin. People didn't know why they felt it, but they did. Round 2 hadn't started, because the fight hadn't started yet, and now everyone knew it. The bell rang for round 2, and Flash came out like he had something to erase. His feet moved quickly. His fists fired faster. The grin was gone now, replaced by tight focus and clenched teeth. He threw a flurry right off the line. Left, right spin step. The kind of combo designed to impress a camera, not find an opening. Chuck didn't move much. He slid back just enough for the air to carry the blows past him. Flash adjusted, came again, and was lower this time, mixing angles. Chuck's hands stayed close, not flashy, not wide. He let the punches glance off the edges of his arms or miss by the space of a breath. Then he tapped. One short body shot, perfect placement. Not hard, but solid. Flash grunted. He stepped back, blinked, and reset. The crowd didn't react. Some of them hadn't even seen it. But the ones who did sat a little straighter. Flash came again, faster. He snapped a jab and lunged with a hook. Chuck had ducked low and dropped another shot to the ribs. Flash's breath caught for a moment. He stepped away and shook his head like he was trying to clear it. Chuck didn't follow. He waited. Flash circled now. The bounce in his legs was smaller. He was still fast, still aggressive. But something had shifted. His rhythm stuttered. His breathing grew loud. He charged again and threw 4 clean strikes. Chuck blocked 2, slipped 1, then tapped the side of Flash's ribs again. Same spot, same pressure. Flash winced. Coach Hayes leaned toward Maya. His voice was low and steady. This isn't a fight. This is a lesson. Maya didn't speak. Her hands clutched her notepad, but she wasn't drawing anymore. Her eyes were fixed on Chuck. Flash backed up now, staring at the floor like it might explain something. He threw a wide kick, fast and high. Chuck stepped under it and tapped his thigh with a short counter. The sound was soft but clear. Flash stumbled and reset. His mouth hung open, pulling air. His gloves started to loosen between exchanges, not on purpose. Just weight catching up. Chuck stepped in once, but there was no punch, just movement. Flash flinched. The crowd caught that one. A ripple of murmurs ran across the gym. People leaned forward, less excited, more unsettled. The sound had gone quiet again. No chants, no cheers. Flash tried to turn the tide. He charged with speed, feinted, high, swung low. Chuck didn't retreat. He pivoted, delivered a clean body jab, and stepped back out. The strike didn't knock Flash down, but it folded him for a second. Flash growled through his mouth guard. He shouted something no one understood. Anger now, not performance. Real frustration, real heat. Chuck stayed still. He didn't respond. He didn't chase. He waited. Flash came again, wilder, less control. He threw shots that weren't aimed anymore, just thrown. Chuck absorbed a glancing hit, then delivered a clean strike to the midsection. Not hard, but precise. Flash staggered back 2 steps, holding his side. Coach Hayes nodded once. That's not muscle memory. That's discipline. Maya whispered something about Flash looking lost. Coach said he wasn't lost. He was being shown where he actually stood. Flash backed into the corner for a breath. His chest heaved. His eyes darted. He looked at the clock, not because he needed it, but because he didn't know what else to look at. Chuck advanced for the first time. Not fast, just forward. Flash threw another wild punch. Chuck slipped under it and tapped his glove against Flash's chest. No power, just placement. The bell rang. Flash leaned against the ropes, not by choice. Chuck turned and walked to his stool. The crowd stayed silent. Not out of awe yet, but something close. They had expected a fight. They were witnessing something else entirely. It happened so fast that most people missed the moment itself. Flash came in wild with a right hook, too wide, too loose. Chuck slipped left and pivoted tight inside, placing his elbow like a whisper under the arc of Flash's swing. The contact was clean. No wind-up, no force. Just perfect angle. Perfect timing. Flash jerked back and stumbled 2 steps, blinking. Then the blood came. It wasn't dramatic. Just a thin red line opening beneath his right eye. but it cut deeper than skin. Flash touched his cheek with the back of his glove and pulled it away slowly. He stared at the smear like he couldn't believe it was real. The referee moved in just to check. Chuck didn't follow. He stood in place, breathing through his nose, hands low, eyes steady. Flash nodded that he was fine, but his posture said otherwise. His feet weren't set anymore. His balance had faded. In the crowd, a hush fell. Not the playful kind, the real kind. The kind that meant people had stopped pretending they were watching a show. Blood had made it undeniable. Coach Hayes leaned forward slightly. He didn't speak. He just exhaled once, like something inevitable had finally arrived. Maya's voice came softly beside him. She said Chuck wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to teach. Coach gave one small nod. Flash snapped out of it with a shout. He charged, trying to reclaim something, anything. But his punches came sloppy now, his feet crossing. He swung wide, and Chuck dodged without effort, not backing up, just letting the storm pass through him. Another counter. This time a simple left to the ribs. Flash winced, took a step back, then came forward again like it hadn't happened. But it had. His eyes betrayed him. The blood continued to trail, not pouring, but enough. Enough to remind everyone watching that something sacred was happening here. Not brutal, not cruel, something quieter, a reckoning. Chuck stayed calm. He didn't press, he didn't punish, he just corrected. Every step Flash took out of anger was met with stillness. Every wild strike brought him deeper into confusion. The crowd didn't cheer. They couldn't. It felt wrong. Like clapping in the middle of a funeral prayer. Flash tried again. A spinning kick, high and desperate. Chuck ducked it. Clean, tapped the back of Flash's knee as it passed and stepped away. Flash caught himself on the ropes. He screamed then, loud, wordless. Not for show this time, from somewhere deeper. Chuck didn't answer. He never had. Maya gripped her notepad tightly. Her eyes were wide, not afraid, but locked in. Like she knew she'd never forget what she was watching. Coach Hayes whispered to no one in particular. That's what happens when truth touches pride. Flash came one last time, arms swinging, mouth open, trying to break something that couldn't be touched. Chuck waited, then lifted his hand and caught Flash's glove midair. He held it for 1 second. No punch, just pause, then let go. Flash backed away, chest heaving. The bell rang. Chuck turned and walked to his stool. Flash stayed where he was, still bleeding, still unraveling. And the crowd sat in silence. Not out of fear, but reverence. Like they had all just seen something they didn't yet understand. But what was real, Flash dropped onto his stool like his legs no longer belonged to him. His chest rose and fell too fast. His gloves dangled at his sides. The cut beneath his eye had stopped bleeding, but something deeper inside him hadn't. His coach leaned in close, panicked, and loud. Words came in a rush, a swirl of instruction and blame. Flash didn't respond. He stared across the ring, not at his opponent, but at the space between them. Chuck sat in his corner like he was waiting for a bus, calm, breathing steadily. He sipped from a paper cup of water and wiped his face with a towel. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. The gym was quiet again. That strange quiet, the kind where people hold their breath without knowing why. Even the kids in the front row had stopped fidgeting. Coach Hayes didn't say a word. His eyes stayed on Flash. Maya leaned forward and asked if it was over. The coach shook his head. Not yet. One more round. Flash wiped his mouth and spat into a bucket. His shoulders slumped. His eyes dropped to the floor. Then Chuck stood. He didn't wait for the bell. He walked slowly to the center of the ring. The referee stepped in out of habit, unsure, then hesitated. Chuck raised one hand. Just a gesture. Not to stop the fight. Just to ask for a moment. Flash looked up. His body didn't move, but something in his face did. He met Chuck's eyes and waited. Chuck leaned in. He didn't speak loudly. Only Flash heard the words, just 5 of them, quiet, clear, no rhythm, no performance, just truth, timing, balance, purpose, control, breathe. Then Chuck stepped back. The ref looked to both corners confused, then motioned for them to return. Chuck turned without a word and walked back to his stool. Flash didn't move for a few seconds. Then he stood. The crowd stirred. Something about the way he stood was different. His chest still rose fast, but his posture had changed. His shoulders weren't heavy now. His eyes weren't lost. He stepped toward the center of the ring before the bell rang. No bounce, no posing, just steps. Slow, deliberate. Chuck met him there. The crowd didn't know what had just happened. They couldn't hear the words, but they felt the silence they left behind. Something had passed between them. Coach Hayes smiled just barely. Maya whispered, "What did he say?" The coach didn't answer. He just nodded toward the ring and said one word. "Watch." The bell rang, but something deeper had already begun. The bell rang for the final round, and Flash came forward like a man chasing ghosts. His feet slammed the mat louder than before, gloves, high shoulders stiff. He wasn't dancing now. He was driving. Chuck didn't move back. He stepped in, eyes steady, breathing quietly. Not defensive, not aggressive, just present. Flash threw a straight right. It missed. Chuck pivoted, placed a palm on Flash's back, and guided him past like redirecting a rushing river. Flash spun and fired a left hook. Chuck dipped beneath it and stepped in close. Then, without strain or drama, Chuck brought Flash down. It wasn't violent. It wasn't showy. It was smooth, a hip. Turn, a balance shift, and Flash was on the ground flat on his back, blinking at the ceiling. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't speak. The air felt too heavy for sound. Flash started to rise, but Chuck knelt beside him. One hand came up not to strike, but to stop. It hovered just near Flash's shoulder. A gesture, not a command. Flash froze. He looked up, confused, breath loud in his ears. Chuck didn't press. He waited. Then he spoke. Softly. Calm. Not yet. Flash squinted like he hadn't heard right. His chest still heaved, his gloves dug against the mat, but he didn't move. Chuck lowered his voice again. You need to listen. Flash blinked. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The crowd sat in silence, watching something they didn't fully understand. Chuck's voice came again. Slow, measured. Not just to win, not just to fight. To feel what's underneath. Flash didn't speak. His jaw clenched, then loosened. His hands opened slightly on the canvas. The tension in his shoulders started to fall. Chuck stood and stepped back. Flash stayed down for a few seconds longer, not because he had to, but because he needed to. He looked up at Chuck, not with a challenge, with something else, something like clarity. He pushed himself to his knees, then slowly stood. This time there was no charge, no rush. He circled with control now, breathing deeper, watching closer. Chuck moved with him, not against him, beside him. They exchanged soft taps, low kicks, nothing wild. Not a fight anymore, a rhythm. Coach Hayes nodded. Maya leaned in. What are they doing? Coach whispered. They're speaking. Flash stepped forward and threw a clean jab. Chuck blocked it, tapped his wrist gently, then turned out of range. Flash smiled just a little. Not pride. Something like peace. They moved again, slow and steady, breath to breath. Then Chuck stepped in and swept low, catching Flash behind the knee. Flash went down again. This time he didn't rush to rise. Chuck didn't stop him. He just waited. Flash sat up, looked across the mat, nodded. Chuck returned the nod. The round wasn't over, but something inside it had finished. The crowd didn't cheer, but they knew. Flash rose for the last time, not as a fighter desperate to prove, but as someone who had finally seen, and the ring felt quieter than ever. The referee stepped between them, raising one hand to call the bout. There was no dramatic gesture, no arms flung upward. No need. The moment didn't ask for noise. Flash stood still, sweat clinging to his skin chest rising slowly. His gloves hung low not from defeat but from something that felt older than that, like acceptance, like understanding. Chuck lowered his hands and gave a small bow, not deep, just enough. Then he turned and walked away. No fist in the air, no celebration, just quiet steps toward the edge of the ring. The crowd didn't react right away. There was a pause, a long one, the kind that felt heavy in the chest. Then someone clapped, soft, steady. Another joined in, then more. Not wild applause, not the sound of fans cheering for a winner. It was different, a sound of people who had seen something they didn't quite know how to describe, a moment that didn't need language. Maya stood slowly, her eyes wide. She tugged her grandfather's sleeve and whispered something soft. That felt like church. Coach Hayes didn't answer. He just placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded. In the ring, Flash didn't move. He sat down right there in the center legs, stretched gloves resting on his knees. His eyes weren't on Chuck. They were somewhere else. Not far. Just inward. He didn't look wounded. He looked cracked open, like something he had spent years building which had just been removed without force. And now the air felt different. He watched Chuck step down from the ring. He watched him walk past the crowd. Still no camera crew. Still no smile. No pose. Just a man moving like the fight had never been about him. Flash blinked. He saw him now, not as a rival, as a mirror. Something in the gym changed then. It didn't feel like a gym anymore. The lights didn't glare. The bleachers didn't creak. It all felt still. A boy in the front row whispered to his mother and asked if it was over. She didn't answer right away. She just wiped her eyes and whispered that she hoped not. A veteran in the corner stood with both hands pressed to his chest. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He just stood breathing deeply, remembering something. Flash finally stood slow and quiet. No one booed. No one laughed. They just watched him. Not like a loser, but like someone changed. He turned once to where Chuck had stood. The spot felt empty, but it wasn't. It held something, like thunder that had already passed, like a drum that had struck without making a sound. Flash climbed out of the ring and didn't look back. The crowd didn't follow him with their phones. They just let him go. And in that space, with no music, no voice, no spotlight, something ancient had happened. Not victory, not defeat. Just truth and silence, and the kind of weight that stays in the air long after the lights go out. Flash sat on the bench in the far corner of the locker room. The walls were bare, cracked with age, and the overhead lights buzzed in that tired way only old buildings know. His gloves were off, but his hands stayed closed. His phone lit up on the bench beside him. The screen pulsed with messages, missed calls, mentions. Hundreds of notifications are pouring in. The headlines had already begun to spin. The comments were louder than ever. He didn't touch it. He stared straight ahead, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the small TV screen mounted in the corner. Someone had looped the fight. It played again. Silent. Just motion. Chuck is stepping in. Flash is missing wide. Chuck slipping. Chuck placing. Chuck pausing. Flash didn't blink. The phone vibrated again. A message popped up from his agency. Something about fallout. One sponsor is pulling their deal. Another is asking for a statement. His team was asking where he was and what his plan was, whether he'd spin it or sit it out. Still, he didn't reach for the phone. The replay continued. Chuck's elbow, the cut, that moment in round 3 when he didn't strike. Just spoke. Timing, balance, purpose, control, breathe. Flash exhaled through his nose and leaned back. He finally picked up the phone. He opened the app with his face on it. The profile has millions of followers. The one filled with reels and filters and stunts. He scrolled for a second, saw his own smile, his own brand. It felt like watching a stranger. He didn't say anything, just tapped the screen twice. Deleted it. Opened the next app. Did the same. His thumb moved quietly and steadily. No pause. No second guessing. One by one they were gone. When the last one disappeared, he locked the screen and set the phone down gently. Not like someone throwing it away, like someone setting something down that had grown too heavy. He looked up again at the screen. The final round was played. That quiet takedown, that hand on the shoulder. He didn't flinch watching it. The door creaked behind him. Coach Hayes stepped in slowly, a water bottle in one hand. He didn't speak, just nodded once and leaned against the opposite wall. The silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Flash wiped his face with a towel. Then he looked over. His voice came low, dry, like something had to push through before it could come out. I thought noise was power. He paused. I thought if I was loud enough, fast enough, visible enough, I could drown out the part of me that still didn't know what any of it meant. Coach didn't respond. Flash looked back at the screen. Now I see it. The noise was the mask. He let the silence sit. I want to earn the right to be quiet. Coach nodded. No lecture, no praise, just stillness. Flash looked down at his hands. Open now, resting in his lap. He didn't clench them again. He just breathed. For the first time, the locker room didn't feel like a place to hide. It felt like a place to begin. The gym smelled like dust and old sweat, the way real places do when they've been lived in longer than they've been cleaned. The same cracked leather bags hung from the ceiling, and the same faded banners sagged along the walls. Morning light pushed through the high windows in soft beams that cut across the floor. Flash stood just inside the doorway, hands in his pockets, hood pulled low. His face was still swollen, one eye tinted purple and gold. The bruises had settled, but the ache in his chest hadn't gone anywhere. Across the floor, Chuck moved slowly and steadily through a group of kids no older than 10. He didn't shout. He didn't correct them with sharpness. He showed them. One step, one hand, one breath. They copied his rhythm. Not perfectly, but with a kind of trust. Flash didn't move. He just watched. Chuck's back was turned, but somehow he must have known. After a while, he glanced toward the door, eyes meeting Flash's without surprise. He gave no wave, no smile, just that look, like he saw everything and still waited for nothing. Flash stepped forward. His shoes echoed across the mat. He stopped just outside the circle of kids, not wanting to break it. Chuck said something quietly, then dismissed the group. The kids scattered, still smiling, some glancing back at Flash with curiosity. Chuck turned to face him fully. Flash took a breath. I don't want to be seen anymore. His voice cracked slightly at the edge. I don't want to perform, or sell, or chase. I just want to learn. Chuck didn't speak. He studied Flash's face for a long moment. Not judging, not questioning, just listening without words. Then he said it. Plain, simple. If you're willing to start with how to stand, then maybe you're ready. Flash closed his eyes, just for a second. He nodded. Chuck stepped aside and motioned toward the mat behind him. Come here, then. The space between them didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a bridge. And Flash took the first step across it. He took off his shoes and moved quietly across the mat. His posture was awkward now. No swagger, no camera confidence, just movement stripped of everything he used to wear like armor. Chuck stood across from him and pointed to the ground between his feet. Start there. Flash looked down. He adjusted. His stance was too wide. Chuck stepped in and nudged his heel inward. then his other, one small movement at a time. Flash didn't resist, he just listened. That's too heavy. Chuck tapped his knee. Shift the weight. Flash followed. Now. Breathe. Flash nodded again, inhaled deeply, then let it out slowly. Chuck didn't praise him. He didn't need to. The silence held something better. Flash looked up. Something inside him softened. For the first time in years, his hands didn't shake. His head didn't spin. His thoughts didn't race. He was just standing. And it felt like everything he'd never done right. Chuck looked him over once more. "We begin here," that's all he said, but it was more than enough. The bus dropped him off on a quiet road just outside a small town in Georgia. The sun hung low behind the trees, casting long shadows over fields and worn wooden fences. Malcolm stood there with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, no entourage, no camera, no sound. It had been weeks since he'd walked out of that Detroit gym. His face had healed. His name hadn't. Not the one people still tried to tag online. Flash was gone now. He didn't kill him. He let him fade. At the town's edge, tucked between a diner and a post office, sat a low brown building with a metal roof and a faded sign that read Hayes Martial Arts. The windows were dusty. The parking lot was cracked, but inside it felt warm. Honest. Malcolm pushed open the door and stepped in. Mats covered the floor. Wooden racks held practice weapons. No posters. No spotlights. Just space. Simple and clean. An older man in a Navy GI looked up from adjusting a young boy's stance. He smiled gently and walked over, asked if he needed help. Malcolm hesitated for a second, then spoke his full name. Malcolm Tyson McNeil. Not the name on contracts, not the name on merchandise, just the name his mother gave him when he was small enough to still be carried. He said he was here to start again from the beginning. The man nodded. He handed Malcolm a folded gi and a white belt. Told him the class started in 10 minutes. No questions. No fanfare. In the back room, Malcolm changed quietly. He stood in front of a small mirror and tied the belt around his waist with care. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled the knot tight. He hadn't worn white in a very long time. The belt felt loose but right. He walked onto the mat and lined up in the back row. 2 kids on either side of him couldn't have been more than 10 years old. One of them smiled and said hi. Malcolm smiled back and bowed when the instructor called for attention. They began with breathing, then the footwork, then stillness. For an hour, nobody asked who he was. Nobody cared what he had done. He stumbled once. One of the kids whispered a tip to help. He nodded and tried again. The class moved slowly. No sparring, no pressure, just learning. Malcolm stayed quiet, following each motion with full attention. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He wasn't proving. He was absorbing. After class, he helped roll up the mats. Carried equipment to the back room without being asked. The instructor gave him a nod as he passed by. It meant more than any trophy ever had. He walked home through quiet streets as dusk settled. Nobody recognized him. Nobody pointed. He passed a gas station where the clerk sat outside drinking iced tea. The man nodded once. Malcolm nodded back and kept walking. That night, in a small rented room with plain white walls, he sat on the edge of the bed holding the white belt in his lap. It still held the warmth of the mat. He didn't miss the lights. He didn't miss the noise. He had spent years trying to be seen, and now, unseen, he finally felt real. The mats felt harder than he remembered. Not because they had changed, but because he had. Malcolm moved more slowly now, but his muscles still twitched with old habits. Every time he stepped forward, his foot landed too wide. Every time he threw a punch, it was just a little too fast. He tried to quiet the instinct, but it fought him. Decades of reacting instead of listening. winning instead of learning. Now, the simplest drills became battles he didn't expect. One evening they practiced kata in silence. Simple stances, breathing, weight distribution. A teenage student named Isaac moved beside him. Barely 15, quiet, focused. At one point, he tapped Malcolm's elbow and gently corrected the angle. Malcolm flinched. He nodded thanks, but inside, shame burned through his ribs. He had headlined arenas. Now, he was being corrected by a kid. After class, Malcolm walked home in the dark. No music, no phone, just his own footsteps and the sound of wind in the pine trees. He thought about never coming back. I thought about the emails, but he still hadn't opened them. People still call him Flash, even though he'd buried the name. He sat alone in his room for a long time. The white belt lay on the chair near the door. It stared back at him like it knew something he didn't. The next morning he returned. He said nothing to anyone, just bowed and stepped onto the mat. During drills he kept getting stuck on the same movement, a turn, a balance shift. Something about it never felt right. The instructor stopped him after class and asked if he was okay. Malcolm didn't have the words, so he just asked quietly why it was so hard now. Why something so slow felt heavier than any fight he had ever been in. The instructor didn't answer right away. He just sat beside him and said the hardest lesson is never in the movement. It's in the mirror. You can fix your stance in a week, but it takes a lifetime to stop hiding behind your own name. Malcolm sat there breathing slowly, and the dojo was quiet around him. He didn't say thank you. He didn't promise to try harder. He just nodded because he understood. The struggle wasn't about his hands. It was about seeing himself without the lights and not looking away. In the next class, he lined up again next to Isaac. When the boy corrected him this time, Malcolm smiled and adjusted. He didn't feel small anymore. He felt open. And in that opening, something true began to grow. The letter came folded in half and slipped into the mail slot without fanfare. No return address, just his name written in a hand that moved with certainty. Malcolm knew before he even opened it who it was from. He stood by the kitchen sink with the morning light brushing across the floor, the envelope resting in his hands. He opened it slowly, carefully, like it might hold more than just ink. The message inside was only one line. We don't fight for the world to watch. We fight so we can face the mirror. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. The words landed in his chest like a bell struck gently, still ringing long after he folded the page back into its crease. He slipped it into his pocket where it stayed the rest of the day. The next morning, at the dojo, the sun filtered through the windows in soft gold. The mats had been cleaned early, and the students lined up in quiet rows, some rubbing sleep from their eyes. Malcolm stood near the back, tying his belt with steady hands. One of the smaller kids, maybe 7 or 8, was struggling to find their footing. Their balance kept tipping. Their knees were too stiff and their arms were moving before their bodies. They kept glancing around, waiting to be told what to do. Malcolm stepped in beside them. He crouched low, not rushing, not correcting with force, just close enough to see. He spoke softly, almost like he was repeating something to himself. Balance first. The child looked at him. Power comes later. He adjusted the child's heel slightly and shifted their shoulder back a bit. Try now. The child moved more slowly this time, more centered. Their form held. A small smile tugged at Malcolm's mouth, quiet and real. Not pride, recognition. The instructor noticed and nodded once across the room. Malcolm stood up and stepped back, letting the child continue. He watched as they moved through the sequence again, a little steadier than before. The letter still sat in his pocket. He didn't pull it out. He didn't need to. He stayed until the mats were rolled and the floors swept. Then He left without a word, walking into the stillness of a town that had never known his old name. There were no headlines now, no contracts, no flash. But in the quiet of that small room, something had passed from one pair of hands to another. And this time, the world didn't need to see it, because it had already found where it was meant to live. It started with a grainy clip from someone's phone, a shaky angle. The moment Chuck slipped Flash's punch, stepped inside, and placed that final takedown. No music, no commentary, just the quiet choreography of control. Within hours, it had been cut, captioned, and reshared across half the internet. The algorithms didn't know what to call it. It wasn't a knockout, it wasn't a highlight reel. But people watched it again and again. They said it felt different. Some called it a masterclass. Others called it the most respectful dismantling they'd ever seen. Then someone clipped the 5 words, a moment of stillness before the final round. Chuck is leaning in, Flash frozen. No audio at first, just the silence and the crowd's breath. Then someone enhanced the sound. You could hear it faintly like a whisper wrapped in stone. Timing, balance, purpose, control, breathe. That was the moment it took off. Martial arts forums lit up. Black belts from Okinawa to Cleveland quoted it. Coaches used it in warm-ups. One caption called it the way in 5 words. The hashtag started the next day. The 5 words. It spread through Jim's TikToks, YouTube breakdowns. Fight analysts called it poetry in motion. Veterans in worn-down dojos cried watching it. They said it reminded them of why they ever stepped on the mat in the first place. Someone made a mural in Sao Paulo. Just 5 words in white paint on a red brick wall. No names, just the silence behind the message. Chuck said nothing. Every major podcast reached out. ESPN sent a producer. A book publisher offered a 6-figure advance. Chuck's name trended for a week straight. He never responded. He didn't need to. A letter came from a university asking if he would speak to their philosophy department. A brand offered him a deal to turn the 5 words into a clothing line. He declined with a sentence written in his own hand. If you wear the words, you'll miss what they mean. That was all he gave them. He stopped teaching for 2 weeks and went hiking through the mountains. Alone. No camera. No trail log. A student said he only brought rice and tea. Back in Georgia, Malcolm heard the news through whispers at the dojo. The kids asked if he had seen it. He nodded. They asked what it was like. He just said it was quiet. His name appeared in one article, barely a mention. Some called him the loud fighter. Others said he was a YouTuber who got humbled. No one got the story right. Malcolm didn't correct them. He liked it that way. He taught footwork to the white belts now. Showed them how to feel the floor with their toes. He didn't talk about the fight. Didn't post about it. His old accounts were gone. Once in a while, someone would recognize him. Their face would shift eyes, squint memory searching. He'd just nod and walk past. They never asked twice. One evening after class, he sat on the bench outside the dojo while the sun dipped below the trees. Isaac sat beside him, sipping a juice box. The air smelled like pine and pavement. Isaac asked if the words were real, if Chuck really said them like that. Malcolm smiled slow and soft. He did. Then he looked out across the field where the light bent golden and said the words again. Not as something to repeat, but as something to carry. Timing, balance, purpose, control, breathe. Isaac nodded like he understood. They sat together until the sky turned purple. The world kept spinning. New stories took over the feeds. Flash faded from search results. The hashtags kept going, but with less fire. People made shirts anyway. Chuck never returned a call. And somewhere in small gyms and quiet corners, students stood barefoot on cold mats, eyes closed, breathing deep. Trying to feel the ground, trying to listen, not perform. And once in a while, without knowing why, they whispered 5 simple words before they moved. The story never ended. It just stepped back into silence. The wood floor of the home dojo creaked in rhythm with each step. Morning light spilled in through the paper windows, warm and soft, painting slow gold across the walls. Chuck moved without sound, guiding his hands through the air as if stirring something older than memory. His grandchildren sat cross-legged on the edge of the mat watching him. They didn't speak at first. They just followed the motion of his arms the way his feet turned so quietly on the floor. There was no music, no clock, no voice raised, only breath, only shape. When one of them finally asked about the fight, Chuck paused just long enough to notice the question. Then he looked down, wiped his palms gently on his pants, and gave a small nod. He didn't call it a fight, he called it a lesson. The boy asked what kind. Chuck thought for a moment, eyes narrowed toward the empty air in front of him. The kind you carry with you. That was all he said. He stood and guided their hands in a simple form, nothing fast, nothing loud. The kind of movement that teaches patience long before it ever teaches power. The kids followed as best they could, a little crooked, a little unsteady, but present. Across the country, under different skies, and in a much smaller room, Malcolm finished sweeping the floor of his dojo. It wasn't his, not really. He helped out a few nights a week mostly when the instructor was short on hands. He didn't take money. He didn't put his name on the wall. He stayed late sometimes, after the students left, just to stretch in silence. The mats smelled like sweat and soap, and the only light came from one buzzing bulb near the ceiling. He didn't need much more than that. Every now and then, someone would ask him to teach them something extra. Not a technique, something smaller, something they couldn't name, a way to feel the floor, a way to know when not to strike. If they were ready, he would stay. If they weren't, he would just smile and tell them to breathe. He didn't talk about the past anymore. Didn't bring up the fight. But once, when a nervous teenager asked how he learned to move so quietly, Malcolm said the real fight doesn't make noise. It waits. It's not the one in the ring. It's the one between breaths. The one you carry home with you. The one you fight when no one is looking. He didn't say more. They didn't need more. He bowed and walked outside the sky overhead painted with soft clouds and streetlight haze. The wind moved gently through the trees, and Malcolm walked home with his hands tucked into his jacket and no phone in his pocket. Inside his small room, he laid his white belt across the back of a chair. Still crisp, still simple, still enough. He made tea, he sat, and in the quiet he remembered the words again, not as something someone told him, but as something he had learned to live. Timing, balance, purpose, control. Breathe. Somewhere a video still circulated with those words flashing across the screen. A voiceover explained the meaning. A montage played. But here in this room, the words had no sound, only weight. They belonged to the silence now. Chuck sat with his grandchildren, watching them bow at the end of practice. One of them laughed, tripped on the mat, and got back up. Chuck helped them brush off their knees and reminded them not to rush. They smiled and tried again. Outside, the sun dipped low, touching the trees with gold and shadow. Chuck stood at the doorway for a long moment before turning off the light. His footsteps didn't echo. He didn't say goodbye. He just breathed once, then closed the door behind him. In 2 towns, 2 rooms, 2 bodies marked by time, something deeper had taken root. Not fame, not legacy, not memory that needs to be remembered, but peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that grows quieter with time, and stronger with stillness. That's the real fight. Not the one with fists, but the one that teaches you how to walk away, whole.